Baroness Bennett of Manor Castle.
My Lords, I declare my position as the Vice President of the Local Government Association. I aim to speak to offer the Green Group's full support for this group of amendments collectively. We've already heard very powerful and important testimony, particularly from all who've spoken, but particularly the Noble Lord Russell in introducing them, and the Noble Lord Woolley of Woodford in making some particularly powerful points about the issues of how BAME communities and other minority communities are affected. I've got three or four points to make in general terms. It has to be repeated that the importance, as all speakers up to now have stressed, of specialist support, that simple provision of accommodation will not meet the needs of victims of domestic abuse. And I wish to particularly make a point about the issue of funding, because as the Noble Lord Woolley said, the competitive tendering for these services has often been, and he used, I think, a very appropriate word, toxic. And I would suggest that I don't think we've got anything in this amendment, and perhaps it's more a matter of policy than law, but the government really should consider moving away from the idea of competition and regular competition as an appropriate way for seeing that these services are funded, moving more towards a system whereby you have a good, ideally local service that's meeting the needs of a community, and some sort of appropriate check is made to see that's continuing. But the assumption is that that funding is being continued, rather than seeing the hugely wasteful need, the resources that have to be put into again and again to bidding to keep contracts. And of course, the risk that you can very easily lose at a complete local service if it just loses one round of contract bidding. Another point I think is really worth making in this context is the place of refuges in feminist history. From the early 1970s onwards, these were places where we saw the growth, the coalescence of a movement, and refuges continue to be a real centre of advocacy and campaigning support for the essential services that domestic abuse victims need. And if we lose those specialist services, we also lose a lot of that advocacy and campaigning, as well as, of course, of the depth of knowledge. Now, just one final reflection on the fact that what we're talking about here is increasing statutory provision. It might seem, in some ways, for the Green Party, we very much believe in localism, local decision-making, with decisions made locally and only referred upwards when absolutely necessary. But what we also need is a foundation. That needs to be a foundation of rights, a foundation of standards, something that is appropriately provided at the national level. But what's also crucial, and those standards, that statutory provision isn't enough, and we know that increasingly local government is left with barely enough funds to meet their statutory requirements, let alone provide the extra services and needs that each local community has. So when we're talking about this, it's crucial that we're also focusing on ensuring that local communities, local government has the funding they need to meet these statutory requirements, and not just that, to meet the extra individual local community needs that each local government area needs to ensure that it truly is delivering what its local community would ask for.